everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Magical Jill, and today we're going to be talking about Fullmetal Alchemist Broken Angel, the video game. And I did play through this game with my husband, but he did kind of talk in the review, did the talking part, whereas I helped write out the outline and my thoughts about it. And it was kind of like a collaboration type thing, so you're mostly going to hear him in this video, and I think he did a really good job talking about all of the points that I completely agree with on this game. I did want to mention, I do wish that there was more games that were kind of like this, but like a little bit higher budget for different animes, just because I think that would be really fun, especially Sailor Moon. But I have a whole video about that. Before we get into it, I did want to say that I have a question of the day. Yay, question of the day. And I wanted to ask, what is your favorite anime video game? It could be Fullmetal Alchemist Broken Angel, it could be a Dragon Ball game, it could be whatever. I just want to know like what your favorite video game based on an anime is, because I think that would be really fun to hear. So now we're going to get into the video, and I hope you enjoy it.
The general story of this game was at the very least overseen by Fullmetal Alchemist manga creator Hiromu Arakawa. When researching this, there were some different accounts of how involved she actually was as a creator. The general internet seems to claim and repeat the fact that she wrote this story, but Tomoyo Asano, the assistant producer of this game, stated in a 2004 interview with IGN that Arakawa oversaw the story, specifically oversaw it. Either way, Arakawa did design characters for the game, and we'll talk more about her feelings and involvement in a follow-up video as well, because we want to take a look probably at some fun facts about this game, since a lot of people don't talk about the FMA games anymore, unfortunately. Now, the game is actually stylized in the same style as the 2003 anime, not Brotherhood, the original anime from Studio Bones before Brotherhood, which kind of diverges into its own story. Now, because of this, it features animation from Studio Bones, who animated that original FMA anime from 2003, and later on also animated Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Now, that said, the game actually started development before the anime was aired, but then it came out after the anime had started airing and become popular. You know, games take quite a while to make. Being stylized around the same time as the 2003 anime was being created, there are actually a handful of animated cutscenes throughout the game that use the voices of the anime, which is really fun. Now, while this is in that artistic style of the 2003 anime, it actually doesn't take place in that continuity, at least most likely. It's argued it takes place in a sort of alternate timeline of the 2003 anime that branched off after episode 17, but then the second game, The Curse of the Crimson Elixir, is kind of making that a bit impossible, because the game is sort of a prequel to Broken Angel, and it contains events occurring completely differently than they did in the anime, which sets the Fullmetal Alchemist trilogy of PS2 games just sort of off on their own in many ways. I mean, you could fit Broken Angel into the 2003 anime, or even Brotherhood in a way, actually, with Arakawa's blessing / involvement in some ways, right after Edward and Alphonse are put under guard by Major Armstrong, but you'd have to ignore Fullmetal Alchemist 2, the game, happening differently than the events did in either the manga, Brotherhood, or FMA 2003. Basically, because of that, it's kind of confusing, and it gets a little more confusing because in another IGN interview, right after Fullmetal Alchemist 2, Curse of the Crimson Elixir came out, Tomoyo Asano said this regarding the continuity of Broken Angel. For Fullmetal Alchemist 1, the story takes place between the 9th and 10th story from the original Gon comic series. Gon is a monthly comic book that's published by Square Enix. As a game, it's a totally original story. Anybody who's not familiar with the animation or the comic book can still enjoy the game because the game introduces all characters and the Fullmetal Alchemist world. It's odd because of this with these statements, a 2003 art style, an involvement from Arakawa, and a weird ability for the trilogy to fully, comfortably fall in any continuity. It's often just viewed the same way as Sacred Star of Milos. Like, you can shove it into a timeline if you want to, you can call it an alternate timeline if you want to. There's no perfect answers, and no matter what you do, someone will probably argue with you about it, because people take the canon and continuity very seriously. I suppose if you want to jam it in somewhere, probably safest to do it in the 2003 anime since it already wildly diverged from Brotherhood and the manga, that actual original manga storyline. But either way, I like most of the versions of the Fullmetal Alchemist stories, so I have fun with it no matter what. Now, when Jill and I played through this game, I noticed that there were a lot of varying opinions on it online. A lot of people were very, very harsh with the game. They compared it to a game like Kingdom Hearts, the original, and they said, hey, this is Square Enix. Why couldn't you make this better? Why was this a bit of a clunky combat system? Why was it not more fluid with its action? This is another game on the PS2 that you came out with. What's going on here? And there were a lot of people who pointed out, well, for Fullmetal Alchemist fans, especially of the 2003 anime, this is probably going to be fun in general because it's a competent game, it works from start to finish, it has a decent story, and that's that. It doesn't really seem like anybody with the first Fullmetal Alchemist PS2 game here, Broken Angel, was singing its praises without criticism. And I found that we kind of fall in that same category. I mean, in general, the art style of the game, I think, is really fun. The gameplay and art are both looking a little bit more like Arakawa's manga art, and then the character pictures and animated cutscenes look more like the 2003 show. So in that way, it kind of blends together these different styles of FMA into a game that made it accessible for a worldwide audience, and that's kind of cool. And the original characters and mystery were handled in an interesting way. I actually would argue that Harmony in particular was a very well-written character. She didn't feel like just a throwaway character. You're kind of trying to figure out what's going on with her throughout the entire game, what the mystery is behind her. She didn't feel like it was just a character you'd bring up, you'd put in one little thing, and then you'd get rid of. Even though this is really Harmony's only story, she doesn't feel like she's written as if she's a one-off character. She feels like she's written as a compelling character that actually has a storyline and arc behind her that's fleshed out. Now, when it comes to the villains, some of them are a little bit more generic. They kind of just feel almost like homunculi, especially one of them feels like a dollar store lust. But regardless, I still think it's interesting to see what's going on behind the scenes, and it actually reminds me a little bit of the Shao Tucker storyline from 2003 and the manga as well. So they do a good job of drawing inspiration from other things that did happen in continuity and making a different and unique story out of it. But that said, some of the combat of the game wears off very quickly in terms of its novelty and in terms of its fun. Like, it's fun, but it got very repetitive. This is not a game I wanted to play for more than an hour or two at a time max. One of the biggest issues with this game is that the combat and alchemy system is not really deep at all. There's certain weapons, especially cannons, that you can exploit very, very easily, or you can put Alphonse on these things, and he pretty much has like 80 to 90% accuracy auto aim compared to Ed, where he's just mowing people down. Like, Al is a marksman in this game, and even though there's cool ideas around Al, like the idea of being able to command him to say, hey, go attack this person, like charge, or hey, go pick up this and use this weapon. Even though there are interesting ideas behind that, I noticed that even back in 2000 and what was it, 3-ish, when people were asking questions about this, one of the questions that came up was, why can't we just play as Al as well? And there are games that make this work, like games like, for example, The Last of Us, where you have Ellie with you in the first one and she has her own personality and character and does stuff, or even games like Star Wars Republic Commando or Halo 5 Guardians, where you actually have a squad and you tell that squad what to do. I would argue that those are games that work with this idea very well. In terms of controlling Alphonse, though, all it really is mashing R1 to get Alphonse to do one thing that you tell him to do, and other than that, he just kind of swings around blindly, goes up to enemies, does his own thing, and he doesn't really have any personality during gameplay. Speaking of that gameplay and combat, in an interview it was mentioned that there's over 50 weapons, and that might be true, but most of the time I just come across a basic sword or lance for either Ed or Al, or I come across dynamite and explosives. There's not really enough weapon variety to make the game's combat deep, which is disappointing because one of the whole things with alchemy is that it's pretty much just limited by your mind. Edward shows this in the show and manga all the time, where he's able to make things that are just absolutely crazy, and you're not really doing too much of that in the game. There's a few things, especially one I love is the little cow that represents Arakawa herself. I like that you can make these kinds of things, but for the most part, it's just basic swords, lances, knives, things like that. It's not really a super in-depth system. And another huge issue with this game is actually having to pause the game in order to heal. You can let Al die if you want, you're a bad brother if you do though, and heal him with alchemy, which I never knew until the end that you could do that. I was always wasting my materials on Al, but to heal Ed, you have to keep pausing the game to go through the inventory, and it just kind of feels clunky without any kind of shortcut. I mean, it makes sense for a game of this time, but even if you do compare it to other Square Enix games of this time, like Kingdom Hearts, you have a shortcut right there on the little command bar, and it just makes me wonder why you couldn't do something like that here. You know, I know that there's a massive budget difference, but it does make me wonder why they couldn't actually do something like that. A lot of the music was really fun in this game. Now, many tracks do end up playing over and over. The soundtrack is not massive, but they're all fun and they have sort of a retro video game feeling. And while I'm not sure if Arakawa ended up making all or only some of the character designs for this game, there are many different chimera types and other things that are unique to the game that do make it stand out and have its own personality. Ed and Al's interactions definitely carried a lot of the game between their banter and cutscenes, whether they are animated or just talking dialogue text that you flip through. You know, no matter what it is, the two characters are so iconic and they were captured well in the game with their personality and even their voice acting. But one thing that's a little frustrating about the two of them is that they just use the same voice lines over and over in combat, and they're used extremely frequently. I really do wish that they had done more between the two of them during combat in the way that the shows, both of them, and the manga capture, because one of the biggest things with Ed and Al is their interactions, and it's just a real shame that they don't have enough of those in the actual game. Like, they don't have enough during combat. It's just Ed saying, ow, 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 or it's Alphonse saying, all right, okay, or it's Ed saying, thank you, thank you. Like, there must only be there's probably less than a dozen lines combined for the two of them for combat. So you're just hearing these over and over and over and over. It reminds me of an arcade game from the 90s where, like, they don't expect you to play it for more than 20 minutes because you're gonna die. Except you're not expected to die in this game. You're expected to play through the whole multi-hour game just hearing this dialogue over and over and over and over and over. It doesn't end. And I really think they could have done a lot better with that aspect of this game. So it's such a mixed bag for me. Like, I'm glad they made it. I'm really disappointed that several other Fullmetal games are not translated in America or to English or really to any language outside of Japanese. There's 2 on the Wii, there's 1 on the PSP, there's also another third one on the PS2, I believe. None of these are translated at all. They're just Japanese. It might be a weird comment, but like, since no one has done fan translations of most of these games, it's actually one thing that I'm hoping that in 5 to 10 years AI could do, because it doesn't seem like anyone wants to do it. Like, it would be really cool if you could run the script through something, translate the whole thing accurately with the context it had, and then, you know, fix those lines in the game for an international audience on an emulator or something. I don't know how that would work. I'm not a tech expert, but it is something I hope could happen maybe at some point, because even though I have problems with this game, the story itself isn't one of them. And I actually do like the idea of kind of fitting some of these side stories, whether they're their own continuity or fitting them into 2003 to kind of flesh it out before you get to the end with Conqueror of Shambhala. I think it's kind of a fun thing that it exists and it's here. I just wish that there were more of these that people could experience, because from the look of it, these games improved as they went on. It's just that the international audience got access to the first ones, which were the least refined, which is kind of where I'd put Broken Angel. It's a fun story, it's interesting, the characters are good, the character designs are done well, obviously, by Arakawa. She herself was very gracious about her involvement in it, and it does seem like the team cared, but they were held back by budget constraints very obviously, and I just wish that there was more of these games that came out later that we had access to, because the early ones just have too many problems.
Thank you all so much for getting to this point in the video. I hope you enjoyed what my husband had to say about this game, and a lot of it was also my thoughts too, because I did help write the outline for it. And I did want to mention that I have an awesome shop called cosmobunny.shop that you guys can go check out some really cool things. I have anime themed things. I have lots of other themed things that are really cool. I make all of my coasters and keychains out of recycled manga and recycled comic books that couldn't be sold in stores due to damage. So instead of letting them go into a landfill, I took them and I gave them a new life and a new purpose. So I'd love if you guys go check out all of my one-of-a-kind pieces on cosmobunny.shop. And I also make some really nice handmade jewelry. So I hope you check that out. And if you want 10% off, you can use code SAILOR in all caps to get 10% off. And also we do have a Fortnite code, which is DJAY123. And you can use that on Fortnite. You don't get a discount, but it does help support our channels a lot. So I hope to see you all in the next video. Bye!